In 2017, Universal Studios announced the birth of a new shared universe of monster movies, bringing their classic horror icons into the contemporary franchise film landscape. But after the critical and financial failure of its first installment, the project was indefinitely abandoned. Now, in 2022, the powers that be have called upon one pulp horror devotee and one snarky film critic to unearth the concept. I'm Dylan Roth.
And I'm Dalton DeShane.
Are you afraid of the dark universe?
The Universal fanfare ends, fading from its usual triumphant punctuation mark into slowly swelling sinister tones. The Dark Universe logo appears, then spins out of view, leaving us looking at a dark and barren planet. We zoom in dramatically, racing through the stratosphere, down into pitch-black storm clouds illuminated by flashes of lightning, then across dead and dry deserts before climbing a path through a foreboding forest to the top of a mountain. There we slow down and close in on a black doorway, standing alone with no walls around it. An eerie light glows from within. We stop here, and all is silent. Then, from out of nowhere, a bolt of lightning strikes the door, flashing the screen white. When the light fades, the doorway is now the door of a grand castle. A hand emerges from under the frame and raps the brass knocker. No one answers, and so Jonathan Harker, played by Hugh Dancy, lets himself in. He's timid and bookish, with glasses and a heavy duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He marvels at the grand Gothic foyer before a voice greets him from the top of the stairs.
Mr. Harker, welcome. I'm so sorry I couldn't meet you stateside. I hope the trip was comfortable.
Dracula, played by Mads Mikkelsen, stands on the steps, dressed formally in all black, although we stop short of putting him in a full cape.
My first time flying private, if you can believe it. I appreciate you sparing no expense, but I have to tell you, there's nothing we need to settle here that couldn't be done over email.
Yes, I imagine that this seems a magnificent waste of time to you, but as you can see, I'm a bit old-fashioned. More than that, however, it's a security issue. Once you reach a certain level of wealth, the idea of digital security becomes nothing more than a comforting bedtime story. And I like to play my property holdings extremely close to the chest.
Yes, completely understood. You wouldn't be my first client to have their information exposed.
There's a bit of selfishness in it as well. I inherited this grand estate from my family, and yet it's too far away for visitors. I enjoy flying out new employees. My way of inviting you into the family.
A wolf howls in the distance. Harker looks startled.
Be still, friend. It's just the music of the night. One of the charms of leaving the noise of the city behind.
Yes, I know. It's a little silly, but I haven't been this far from a cell tower since before they were invented.
Dracula smiles and descends the steps, inviting him into the dining hall for dinner. Several servants, all of them young and beautiful, deliver their meal. Harker begins to discuss business, mentioning the sale of several large properties, including a mine in California and a casino in Portland, Oregon.
Please, no business over dinner. I have too much reverence for food. This is one of the few times I let myself disengage from my work. There is nothing that replenishes me like putting my focus solely on the divine nourishment of meat, wine, and warm company.
Of course, Mr. Dracula.
Count, if you please. I know it's an outdated title, but I like to honor my ancestors when I'm here in the castle.
Apologies, Count Dracula. There's nothing here that can't wait till morning.
So tell me about yourself, Harker.
Well, let's see. I got my master's from Brown in 2013.
I don't care about that, my boy. This may be our first time meeting, but you don't need to worry about proving yourself to me. You are here because my advisors tell me you're the best there is at what you do, and I trust them. So tell me about your life, your family. Do you have a wife?
No, I don't.
I'm sorry, I'm being old-fashioned again. I should be more general. Any spouse, perhaps?
No. To use a cliche, I'm married to my work.
A shame. Life is too short to toil away without love.
What about you? Is there a Mrs. or Mr. Dracula?
Touché. No, I'm afraid love is in the rear view for me. My life has grown too long for love. There is little that sparks my interest enough anymore to catch fire. But just between us, trust that I have my share of fun.
That sounds like a very lonely outlook.
Well, then we share that in common. A couple of bachelors. At least for tonight, we can be lonely together.
Dracula smiles at Harker. Harker is distracted by the strangeness of the smile and cuts his thumb on his knife. All of the servants freeze and stare at him.
It's nothing. It's just.
Why are you just standing there? Bring this man a Band-Aid. My apologies, the locals here are superstitious. The internet age has not reached all corners of the world just yet.
They chat a bit more, and Dracula takes Harker to his room. He tells him to ring the bell if he needs anything, and a servant will tend to him. When he leaves, Harker hears a key turning in the lock, locking him in for the night. He tries the handle to be sure, a bit disturbed by this, but he goes to sleep anyway. He is awoken in the middle of the night by a whispered voice.
Help me.
His eyes shoot open. He hears the voice again and sits up.
Mina?
He asks. The voice comes again. He scrambles up and tries following the voice, tracing it to a bookshelf. He pounds on the books in a panic.
Mina? Can you hear me?
He eventually finds a lever that causes the bookcase to swing open into a secret passageway. Stone steps lead down into blackness deep below him. He grabs one of those weird, chest fanny packs from his duffel bag and straps it on. Inside is a small flashlight. He heads down into the darkness. We draw this out, him shuffling through the pitch black passage with his visibility limited by the weak flashlight. It's very barbarian. Eventually he hears water, a constant splashing, more than a drip but not quite a waterfall. He reaches an opening and enters into an enormous dungeon with a floor covered in pools of fresh blood. Dozens of naked bodies hang from the ceilings, eviscerated and spilling down into vats. In the center of the room is a large stone coffin. Harker sees it and his eyes darken. He stands up straight and unzips his chest pack. From inside, he pulls out a string of wooden stakes and attaches it to his belt. He pulls out a crucifix and puts it around his neck. And finally, he pulls out a gleaming gold crook with a bulge in the middle where the curvature meets the handle, showing an eye. It is clearly Egyptian in origin. He walks slowly toward the coffin with the crook held in front of him. He reaches it, pushes back the cover, but it's empty. There's a shriek of bats, and suddenly he is beset by the servants from earlier, transformed into monstrous vampires. A fight ensues, and it's clear they are no match for Harker. This seemingly mild-mannered professional proves himself to be more than a capable fighter. He's a goddamn professional vampire assassin. He dispatches the vamps easily, and then hears a voice from behind.
Did you have trouble sleeping, Dr. Van Helsing?
Jonathan Harker, a.k.a. Abraham Van Helsing, turns to Dracula, the mask dropped and his gaze steely.
Just hearing things, it seems. Another trick of yours, Count?
No tricks here, boy. I have lived too long to play any more games.
He reaches his arm towards the passageway he entered through, and a woman, Mina Harker, played by Anna Friel, runs through with desperation on her face.
My love, you're here! My love!
Mina, yes, don't worry. I'll...
He stops as it becomes clear that it is not he who she is talking to. She runs to Dracula and embraces him. He stands motionless, still looking at Van Helsing as if he doesn't notice she's there. His face is blank. She kisses his neck, his ears, runs her hands through his hair and over his chest. She's ravenous, but Dracula couldn't care less.
You bastard! Release her at once!
Your alias was expertly crafted. I pored over your documents and found no holes. To be honest, I wasn't completely sure it was you until I found Mina and brought her here. It's been centuries since anyone has gotten this close to me, Abraham. Congratulations are in order.
Stop it. I've had enough banter. As you said, no more games.
He crosses his arms over his chest with the crook in one hand and a wooden stake in the other, and begins reciting a spell in Coptic as he approaches Dracula. For the first time, Dracula smiles.
This is your big play, Abraham. Come now. After years of taking shots from the shadows, I expected more from our first meeting. Such a flawless paper trail, and yet you couldn't be bothered to finish your research.
With a wave of his hand, Mina is pushed back from Dracula, still reaching and clawing for him desperately. With his other hand, he gestures to Van Helsing, who becomes gripped by his spell. Van Helsing drops the crook and stake and shakily reaches up to tear off his crucifix.
No, you can't.
Dracula gives a violent flick of his wrist, and Van Helsing goes limp on his feet as if he has fallen asleep. All is quiet for a moment, then he snaps awake and rushes to Dracula. He has been afflicted with the same lust as Mina, groping Dracula, kissing him deeply on the mouth, pushing his hips against the Count's. Dracula lets this happen, For a moment, maybe it looks like he's trying to find some feeling here, like maybe he genuinely wants to enjoy this moment, but finds himself unable. Frustrated, he flicks his wrist again and Van Helsing is pushed back.
I want you to know that I've enjoyed our tete-a-tete these past few years, Abraham. Truly, I have. But I'm close to the end now, and I can't have any loose ends in the way.
He gestures again, and Mina and Van Helsing turn their lust towards each other, colliding in front of Dracula and going at each other.
I'll miss you, my friend.
He gives another wrist flick, and Mina and Van Helsing's lust turns more violent. As Van Helsing lifts up Mina's dress and they start having sex, their hands and teeth grow firmer, scratching deep enough into each other to draw blood and biting chunks of flesh off of each other's bodies. Dracula picks up the golden crook and leaves them to fuck and eat each other to death. We follow him in close-up as he leaves the chamber, Van Helsing and Mina an unfocused red blur in the background, Dracula's sorrow apparent on his face. The Dark Legion, House of Dracula.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Are You Afraid of the Dark Universe? We have a very special episode in store for you, as you can already tell.
Yes, welcome to the finale of Phase 1, Part 1 of our finale of Phase 1. I mean, technically Part 2, right?
Kind of, sort of. The first one you have to listen to. Welcome to anybody who's trying us for the first time, like all of you who saw the Avengers without watching Iron Man and whatnot. Rest assured, it will be okay to start here. And begin your entry into our dark universe. If you're new to the podcast, here's what we do here.
Yes.
I'm Dylan Roth.
And I'm Dalton DeShane.
And every episode, one of us comes to the other to pitch the next installment of the dark universe, beginning with the actual movie, 2017's The Mummy.
Which we do take as canon. That is canon for our series.
Still counts, and you'll see characters from that film here in our story. And then moving forward each episode to pitch the next chapter and what we expect to be a huge Infinity War scale, like 3 parts of 6-part saga.
We're going to go as big as the Marvel Universe gets. As long as they're still cranking them out, we're going to keep cranking them out, right?
But faster.
Yeah, that's true. We're going to catch up. We're going to have to plan for that. But yeah, so let's catch you up a little bit on what we've done since last time you heard us. Because if you skipped last episode, because we did start it with a disclaimer saying that there would be spoilers for the movie, basically what we did is instead of our normal procedure where we each go and we write our own movies and then we come and present them, for our Avengers style crossover, we decided to write it together. So the previous episode was us trying to figure it out in the room.
And then as soon as we got off of the podcast, we went into the other room to figure out, like our next broad steps, and ended up outlining basically the entire movie you're about to hear.
Yeah, if you listen to the last episode, and I'll try not to spoil anything, but we came with some ideas and mostly ended up deciding what our character arcs would be, and the structure we would have, and the kind of set pieces we wanted to happen, but we didn't know the plot. And you might have seen at the end of the episode, you might have heard at the end of the episode that we talked about maybe recording this episode right after, like we were going to take a break and then come and try to figure it out.
No, but it's been 2 weeks for us too, actually.
Instead, we stood in my living room and we kept saying, we need a break. We need to let our minds rest. We need to take a pause. And instead, we ended up beating out basically the entire film in real time. Again.
Yeah, but in the more specifics. And then we went home. We had carved out. We decided, okay, this is the section you're going to do. These are the sections you're going to do. We got a shared Google Doc, and we spent the next 2 weeks going back and forth and hammering out and finessing the movie. So we've each taken certain sections of the movie that you'll hear us read the narration for, and then also have given each other feedback. And so for a change, instead of us sort of workshopping the idea here as as one person puts forth a pitch, we're going to present you with like a pretty complete product.
I would say this is
it's a finished first draft.
It's a finished first draft. I would say this is 80% a full screenplay. There are areas where we were just kind of just for the sake of time and podcasting.
Yeah, and the fact you're going to be listening to it here on a podcast.
Yes,
we're not going to do an exterior so blah blah blah.
Exactly.
But yeah, this is a 75-page script, which would be a short screen. Is it 80 now?
I think it hit 80 with our edits.
Wow. Okay. Well, so it's the length of a real screenplay, although maybe not the most dense and detailed and like screenplay.
But I think what we really went blockbuster on this, and I think there is enough in this movie that this would be a 2 hour, 10-minute film.
Yeah, probably
215.
It definitely have like a, you know, $150 to $200 million budget.
Yes.
And that's what Universal's going to give us when they buy it.
You know, we're making a blockbuster franchise here. You got to spend some money. You got to cast some big actors. Speaking of which, as you've probably already heard, we have gotten our friends and very talented people to play all of the roles in this film.
Yeah, and we'll give that. We thought it would kind of be a little bit confusing to normally Dalton and I just split up the dialogue, but there are a lot of characters in this story, as you'd expect from an Avengers style crossover.
Yeah.
So we thought it would make the show a lot more listenable and easier to follow with voices, and also just felt like a time to do it, like a nice ritual to maybe start doing for our big crossover episodes. Give it a little bit of an extra special kick. So if this is it, you know, if this works out, then when we do our next, you know, crossover film, maybe we'll assemble a new group of people.
And so in the interest of doing our opening credits over our title, we're going to insert a drop right here where we tell you who's playing everybody.
Or where maybe we have them introduce themselves.
Oh, yes, that would be great.
Yeah.
So here's our cast introducing themselves and letting you know who they're going to play in the Dark Legion, House of Dracula.
Hi, I'm Gita Jackson, and I'm playing Mads Mikkelsen as Dracula.
I'm Patrick Willems, and I'll be playing Hugh Dancy, playing Jonathan Harker.
I'm Julian Ames, and I'll be reading Mason Gooding, playing Larry Talbot, a.k.a. Wolfman.
I'm Dominic Griffin, and I'm playing Javier Bardem, playing Victor Frankenstein.
Hi, I'm Kate Wardell, and I'll be playing Rita Talbot as portrayed by Tandy Newton in The Wolfman.
My name is Ella Dawson, and I'll be playing Dr. Jennifer Halsey as portrayed by Annabelle Wallace in the 2017 film The Mummy.
Hi, I'm Steph Salo, and I'll be playing Darcy Carden, playing Carol Laemmle.
I'm Joe Stando, and I'll be playing John C. Reilly, playing the Invisible Man, Jack Griffin.
Hi, I'm Nick Miller, and I'll be playing Jake Johnson, playing Chris Vale.
We also have Rachel Millman playing Amber Midthunder, playing Gwen Conliffe.
And I, Dylan Roth, will be playing Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, originated by Russell Crowe.
And I, Dalton Deshane, will be playing Nick Morton, the Mummy, as originated by Tom Cruise in 2017's The Mummy. It's very main character syndrome of me to cast myself. But I've gotten really attached to Nick Morton after writing him in The Invisible Man, after hating him in The Mummy.
Yeah, but that gave you the incentive to kind of reinvent him as a character that you like, right? And you're doing. I like that also the arc that you're working on with this character is still feels like it's compatible with what we started with.
Yes, I didn't want to completely like turn him upside down. I think I've created something consistent with that movie that hopefully will be more interesting than what that movie did to him. So so
when we did our last episode, we had not yet picked a title for the movie.
Yes, I was just
And it is interesting that we put the word out asking people for names for the team, and we like racked our brains for weeks, months, really trying to come up with a team. And we went back to I think our first idea, which I think your first idea was the Dark Legion.
It was definitely one of the first ideas I had for like a team name. It's funny because I think it ends up working the way we find it in the screenplay, which works a little bit how we talked about it last episode.
Yeah.
And then you came up with House of Dracula because that's an actual Universal monster crossover film.
Yeah, it actually was a movie called House of Dracula in the later years of the like sort of, I guess, post Golden Age Universal, which was a crossover. It was Dracula and Frankenstein were both in it. And so somebody suggested that idea to me, and I'm like, that's perfect.
Yeah.
We have to do that because the context is just exactly the right one.
I also really like the idea, and we'll talk about probably this more in our phase 2 planning, but I like the idea of keeping all of our movies, at least for now, titled after actual Universal movies, which was very easy in the first phase because it's just The Mummy, Frankenstein,
right.
The Wolfman, but I kind of like... it's sort of like when Marvel Comics will like do a new crossover event, but title it after one of their classic crossovers, which sometimes can be a little
confusing.
Cringy. But I think in this case, that actually makes sense for us to do and to repurpose House of Dracula as like a modern retelling of a monster crossover film.
I'm really happy with how that turned out. Yeah. I don't know that I'm going to be able to follow that rule because I came up with some titles of movies potentially for phase 2, but we'll talk about it in a future episode.
I will probably keep to it on my side just because I think it's really fun. But that's for a future app. In the meantime, we should talk about our director.
That's right. When you last heard us, we were struggling to come up with a director for this film. And we had kind of maybe considered having Brian Fuller do it. But then we realized that despite his ownership over Hannibal, a very visually striking show, he's never directed anything.
That was shocking to me. I just assumed that he had directed at least the pilot or something, or a handful of key episodes, but no, has never directed anything apparently.
Other than a couple documentaries for Shudder, I think.
Yes, he did Queer for Fear, which is excellent, and everyone should watch Queer for Fear.
So we were bouncing via texts back and forth about, okay, we need a director who is has horror chops, but also this is a big action blockbuster. Who could do both of these things? And also, we'd like it to not be another white dude. And for some fucking reason, it took us forever. Dalton, you were like, oh, wait, what about who we're about to name? And we were both like, shut the fuck up.
It's actually embarrassing. You might have already been screaming at your phones this person's name.
There may have been
in the last episode.
The past 2 weeks have probably been you tweeting at us being like, why don't you just pick James Wan?
Yeah.
Obviously, it should be James Wan.
Because he's done blockbusters, he's done Fast and Furious movies, and of course, he created the Saw franchise.
Saw franchise, he does the...
he did Malignant.
He did the Conjuring series, is what I was trying to think of. The highest grossing horror franchise of all time.
Yeah.
And fucking Aquaman, which, maybe not your favorite movie, but definitely demonstrates that, if you give this guy a fuck ton of money, he's going to do something interesting with it.
Yeah, I mean, the one of the we really wanted to stick to, okay, who would be someone that would actually get this job, being that this is a $100 million+ movie, big budget action. And there's so many great, I want to be clear, there's so many great non-white dude horror directors that I think because of the Hollywood system have not gotten to do big budget stuff. There's a lot of I looked at the director of His House, Remy Weeks, which is one of my favorite horror movies of the last few years. Tigers Are Not Afraid, Issa Lopez. We talked about Nia DaCosta last time because she did do Candyman. I wasn't thrilled by Candyman, but I think she does. It could be a potential thing, but it just didn't feel right for this kind of thing. But so James
these are directors
Wan is
that
perfect.
These are directors that we should keep in mind for Phase 2
Yes,
movies.
that we can bring up into our system through the individual films.
But part of also the idea of us picking directors when we pitch these movies, not only as suggestions to Universal, who has totally and absolutely hired us to talk about these movies and pitch it, but is because we want you, the listener, to be able to create a picture of the movie in your mind. Yeah. So the more familiar a director it is, the more of a purpose that serves.
Yeah.
And so for something like this, there was only one answer.
Yeah.
It's got to be James Wan.
It's got to be James Wan. He's definitely the shoe-in. So we should get back into the screenplay. Like Dylan said, we divided the writing of this and we sort of broke it up in chunks. I wrote that initial opening sequence because I pitched that on the last episode. Act 1, the rest of Act 1 was written by Dylan. And we can talk about it a little bit more once we're done. Before we go on, is there anything you want to... any questions about the opening scene? Was it different than you imagined when you read it for the first time? Was it pretty much in line? It's pretty much in line with what I pitched last episode. It's pretty much what you pitched last time.
Yeah. We wanted to create you talked about opening the movie with a little mini horror movie that teases the action nature of the movie, but that demonstrates this will be scary, it will be uncomfortable, it will be bloody. Yeah. And not just this is the Avengers, but with Universal monsters.
Well, and also I wanted to establish Dracula as a threat because we've only kind of seen him operating in the shadows, and I wanted to both give him a bit of a character. We see some of his loneliness here, some of his reclusiveness,
but also he's legitimately scary. It's a very, very unsettling situation that's also very much in keeping with Dracula's thing. As squicky as it is, he's playing with these human beings for not for sexual gratification, but for the humiliation that they suffer for wanting to be with him. And that's very fucked up.
One thing,
and it's going to make a lot of people turn off the movie immediately. But it is very Dracula, and it certainly makes us want him to fucking die.
Yes. Well, and the thing that I really wanted from our Dracula, we talked about this a bit, is he's not a romantic Dracula, and he's not like a snarling beast Dracula. He is sociopath Dracula. He has lived so long that he doesn't care. And, you know, he's trying to feel something. Maybe he does want some sexual gratification, but he, you know, after hundreds and hundreds of years, nothing's interesting to him
He's so dead
anymore.
inside that he's not even getting anything. And it is a really, I think that it is a specific take on the character, which is good because we don't want to just be Monster Squad. No disrespect to Monster Squad.
We love the Monster
Squad. We do like Monster Squad.
The exploding werewolf out the window.
But yeah, so I think that every character, whether they've been in a previous movie or not, needed to have an introduction, right?
Yeah.
And Dracula's is really strong. I think in my writing of the first act, it's a good segue. In my writing of the first act, I tried to make sure to firmly reestablish who each one of these characters is. So that if you haven't listened to any previous episodes or you haven't seen any of these other hypothetical films, you're going to be lockstep in with what they are for this film.
Yeah. And I think you did an excellent job.
Thank you, Dalton.
I really like all these introductions. So we should get into it. And dive back into The Dark Legion, House of Dracula.
Act 1. We cut from the grisly image of two lovers clawing each other apart to a surprisingly tender image of two lovers who have recently torn each other apart. Gwen Conliffe, played by Amber Midthunder, wakes up in the arms of her boyfriend Larry Talbot, played by Mason Gooding. As we pull back from them and continue in a single take, we regard the ever-increasing details of the scene. First, Gwen and Larry are both naked and covered in scratches, like from the claws of an animal. Over the course of the shot, however, it's possible to see that the wounds are healing at a pace just barely visible to the naked eye. The two of them are sleeping on a bare, tattered mattress on a concrete floor. Gwen rises from bed and retrieves two fluffy hotel bathrobes from a narrow metal box in the corner of the room. The box is dented and scratched with claw marks. The heavy metal gates of their cells slide open, and Gwen and Larry step out into a hallway where a dozen cells just like it are also opening to release a slew of other guests with bathrobes and bruises. This is the Robert Weston Smith Community Center, or as guests know it, the Wolfman Jack Werewolf Sanctuary. Like everyone else, Gwen and Larry have spent the last 3 nights locked up so they can wait out the full moon in relative safety. They take breakfast in the center's cafeteria, which is about the quality of your average Holiday Inn's buffet. Gwen enjoys her eggs and makes small talk with the other people at the table, but Larry isn't very comfortable with the food or the company. The full moon is over and it's time for them to move on. They take their gear, still packed in duffel bags from the Villalobos gym in Talbot, California, and walk out to their van by a curb in a rural Arizona town. Someone's parked them in, so they scan the street for observers and, finding none, each pick up one end of the van and casually move it into the street. They start driving towards their next stop, which is bringing them closer to where Gwen grew up in New Mexico. The air conditioner in the van is broken. For Gwen, this has been an adventure, traveling from town to town, spending every full moon at a different werewolf sanctuary, and helping to build a secure communications network between them. She's basically a full-time community organizer now, subsidized by anonymous celebrity werewolves, one of whom she's convinced is actor Oscar Isaac. For Larry, however, it's a big step down from the life he was accustomed to as the heir to a mining fortune. Separated from his family, wealth, and station, Larry has yet to get used to living below the poverty line, and despite Gwen's assurances, he doesn't think he ever will. Time passes as they drive through the desert, and they eventually pull over at a rest stop, the only gas station in 100 miles. They're surprised to find that someone is waiting there for them, Dr. Henry Jekyll, played by Russell Crowe. Jekyll appears to be your typical tweed jacket and glasses-clad academic, the only sign of his strange nature being a black leather glove over his left hand. But Gwen knows better. She's hesitant to trust him, seeing as the last time they met, Jekyll had planned to kill her and Larry for being werewolves. Jekyll assures her that he's no longer an operative for the global monster-hunting militia Prodigium, and he means her no harm. He's part of a new team now, one that needs their help.
Last time we met you, you tried to kill us, and now you want us to just get into your town car to the airport?
I understand your hesitation, but...
Does it have air conditioning?
Yes, Larry starts walking to the car. Gwen follows, exasperated. At the North Pole, there's a small hovel lit by a wood fireplace in the middle of the tundra. Its sole resident, a tall, broad, and imposing statue of a man, sits inside, stoking the fireplace. In the flickering light, we can barely make out the details of his face. The door to his hut opens, and bright white moonlight reflects off the snow, blinding him. His vision returns as a slender figure stands in the doorway.
I told you not to follow me back here. In a few days, I'll be as north as I can go, and there will be my final resting place.
The slender figure closes the door, restoring darkness to the room. The visitor is Rita Talbot, played by Tandaway Newton, a fashionably dressed middle-aged woman of instantly apparent poise and charisma. She wears the sort of long black overcoat that's intended for winter in New York, not the Arctic.
Ah, you're someone new. You are not cold?
I don't get cold any more than you do. And yet...
Rita helps herself to a metal stoker next to the fireplace and prods the wood. The fire pops enough to offer a clear outline of the man's handsome profile.
The fire comforts me.
I'm not your first visitor then.
No, there was one other. I shall tell you what I told her. There's nothing you can offer me that will convince me to leave my solitude here. You have nothing I want, for I want nothing.
Everyone wants something. And my employer happens to be the only person on this earth who can give you your heart's sole desire.
The man pauses.
It cannot be done.
Oh, but it can. In exchange for a favor from you, Victor, we can resurrect the bride of Frankenstein.
Rita returns to the door and opens it as if it is opportunity itself, letting in the moonlight and revealing the scabbing and pus seeping from the stitched-together face of Victor Frankenstein, played by Javier Bardem. We're at a museum in the heart of Cluj-Napoca, the most modern and populous city in Romania's Transylvania region. It's the home to an assortment of relics of national importance, but rarely receives visits from foreign scholars. As such, its curator is surprised when English archaeologist Dr. Jennifer Halsey, played by Annabelle Wallis, drops in to take a look at the Cross of Carmilla, an artifact that supposedly repels dark forces. Of course, this is all just silly folklore. It's only a heavy silver necklace, one whose authenticity is currently in dispute due to a similar artifact being found in Ireland. Dr. Halsey has come to examine the cross and confirm that it's the real deal. The curator lets Halsey into a secure room in the heart of the museum, where she inspects the necklace closely. Before she gives her verdict, Halsey, with some embarrassment, asks to use the bathroom. The curator leads her out, and we're left alone in the inspection room. Or are we? Once the door is sealed, some force picks up the cross and lifts it about 5 feet in the air, where it disappears as if swallowed by an invisible man. What's happened is that it's been swallowed by the invisible man, Jack Griffin, the voice of John C. Reilly, who waits for Halsey and the curator to return and unlock the door so he can slip out with the goods. Both Jack and Halsey are being advised via hidden induction earpieces by Carol Laemmle, played by Darcy Carden, who sits in a cargo van parked across the street. Carol handles logistics in the passenger seat, while Chris Vale, played by Jake Johnson, stays ready behind the wheel. They banter about how nervous they are trying to pull this heist in broad daylight, but a voice from an unseen figure in the back of the van reminds them that in Transylvania, a daytime op is a lot safer. Plan A is for Halsey to feign ignorance of the relic's disappearance and leave with her cover intact, but the curator gets wise to her involvement and calls for security to lock down the museum and place her under arrest. She springs into action, fighting past guards and making her way towards the exit while Jack, invisible, knocks over displays of precious artifacts into the path of their pursuers. She tosses Jack a gadget from her coat, a small sonic screwdriver-looking thing. It's a lockpick device Halsey has kept from her time at Prodigium, the secret monster hunting organization she used to work at with Dr. Jekyll. Jack runs ahead of her, able to advance faster since he doesn't have to hide, and uses the gadget to raise the steel shutters at the front of the museum, just in time for her to slide underneath. He follows, as do the guards. Carol scoots into the middle seat of the van's cabin, and Halsey piles in next to her. The guards continue their pursuit, and are only a few paces behind, dangerously close to the van. Vale starts the engine and books it.
What about Jack?
He'll have to catch up.
On the sidewalk, Jack apologetically knocks a cyclist off his bike and starts pedaling frantically in the hopes of keeping pace with the van. Pedestrians dive out of the way of the apparently self-driving bicycle. He's holding Halsey's lockpick in his teeth, rendering his vocalizations unintelligible. Police cars skid onto the street and chase the van. They're gaining, and Vale can't shake them. It's time for the nuclear option. The van's back doors swing open, revealing the unseen final member of the team, Nick Morton, played by Tom Cruise. He stands in the back of the speeding van and reaches one arm outward towards the oncoming cars. A thin tentacle of energy extends from his palm and stretches to the chest of the driver of the lead police car. Once it touches its target, the thread grows thicker and brighter, as if Nick is siphoning his energy. The cop suddenly and painlessly dies behind the wheel of his vehicle. Carol views the action through a grate in the van's partition.
Holy cats, did you just murder a cop?
I'll only kill him for a second.
In the cop car, the driver's partner panics and grabs the wheel, sending the car into a gnarly lateral tumble that blocks the street behind them.
He might be okay.
Unable to stop short, the following cop cars smash right into the crashed one, creating a dramatic and fiery multi-car pileup. Carol and Halsey look back at Nick.
I can fix that.
Now free of pursuit, Vale slows down the van so that Jack's bike can catch up, and Nick offers a hand to lift the invisible man into the back. He shuts the doors behind him.
We're home free.
Vale has spoken too soon. A SWAT van pulls out from a cross street ahead. Vale swerves to the right, exposing the driver's side window to the sights of a police rifle. A bullet goes straight through Vale's neck. He starts gushing blood and struggles to keep control of the vehicle until Carol can switch seats. She drives while Halsey applies pressure to the wound. Nick offers encouragement from the back of the van and assures him that he'll be okay. The chase continues until eventually Carol manages to pull the van off into what appears to be a drainage pipe, but is actually the secret entrance to the team's hideout. Their base is a run-down military-style outpost, furnished with slightly outdated versions of all the expected equipment. Inside, we see Nick and the invisible Jack lifting Vale onto a medical cot. Dr. Jekyll is already inside, as are his guests, Gwen and Larry, to whom he doesn't have time to explain any of this. This is pretty shocking for the newcomers, considering it involves a pair of floating, bloody hands. Jekyll hurries to Vale's side and begins to work on him, with Halsey assisting, but it's too late. He's lost too much blood, and there's nothing Jekyll can do. I leave it to you, Mr. Morton. Nick cracks his knuckles and then waves his hands over Vale's body. White bandages manifest from out of Nick's hands, wrapping themselves around Vale from head to toe. There's a soft yellow glow from inside the bandages, and after a silent moment of anticipation, Vale gasps loudly, sits up, and begins frantically tearing them off of his face.
Fucking hell am I getting tired of that shit.
Good to see you too, Vale.
I mean, Jesus, this is the 4th fucking time.
It's the 3rd time.
4th, Nick. Trust a guy to remember how many times he's been to hell. It fucking sucks down there, man.
Jekyll interrupts the squabble and beckons his young companions to approach the team gathered around Vale's cot. Ladies and gentlemen, if I may introduce you to our guests, Ms. Gwen Conlift and Mr. Lawrence Talbot.
Right. You're the werewolves Henry's been telling us about. Good to have you aboard.
Yeah, good to meet you too. Hey, did you just raise the dead?
Yeah, it's a thing I do. This is Vale. He's a bit of a character.
Yep, you never know what you're going to get with me. Sometimes I'm dead, sometimes I'm alive. I'm a real wild card.
I'm Dr. Jennifer Halsey. I'm our resident archaeologist specializing in divine artifacts. I used to work with Henry at Prodigium, but I hope you won't hold that against me.
I'll try my best.
Carol steps forward eagerly.
Hi, I'm Carol Laemmle. I'm a paranormal expert. Well, not as much of an expert as Jenny. She's the best. I've been learning so much from her. She's like, ugh, she's so smart. I'm so excited to meet you both. I've read a lot about werewolves. Is it true that you grow hair under your tongue even when you're human? Never mind. We can talk shop later. Are you a hug person? I feel like greeting a new roommate is a hug situation, but I want to respect everyone's boundaries.
Larry reluctantly accepts a hug from Carol. She's about to hug Gwen when they're both startled by a voice coming from the direction of the floating blood splatter, who steps forward and offers a sticky red handshake.
And I'm Jack. I'm invisible.
Gwen has noticed that. Gwen declines the handshake.
Dr. Jekyll told us you're some sort of secret vampire hunting society. You must have a serious budget to put a place like this together.
This base used to belong to Prodigium, my and Henry's former employer, who seemed to have inexhaustible resources. They abandoned this outpost some time ago.
We do a lot of creative requisitioning.
Stealing. He means stealing.
That reminds me, I gotta visit the little boy's room. Back in a jiff.
Nick explains that the team just returned from stealing the Cross of Carmilla, which will offer one member of the team some added protection against vampires on their next mission. For the past year or so, they've been performing carefully targeted hits against the operations of Count Dracula, Lord of all vampires, trying to cut him off from sources of power and profit. It's still too dangerous to take the fight to Dracula directly, but they've been getting closer, even setting up shop right here in Transylvania, Dracula's backyard. Dracula is not only a vampire, but a master of dark magic, and Nick feels it's too dangerous to take the fight to him right now. But eventually, the team will need to strike hard at Castle Dracula itself. When they do, they'll need all the muscle they can get. Thus, they've risked flying in Gwen and Larry, both fugitives from justice, here to Romania to lend their lycanthropic strength to the cause. He can offer shelter, safe place to wolf out once a month, and most importantly, a cause to fight for. Gwen says she and Larry are in.
Hold up. Don't we already have a fight back home?
It's all one fight. We're trying to keep our people safe. You're saying you don't want to help kill an immortal billionaire who's been bleeding the world dry for centuries? I was born for this.
Gwen's badass energy totally dissolves when Jack returns from the bathroom, dangling the Cross of Carmilla from his invisible fingers.
Alrighty. Who wants to try it on?
In the dining room of Castle Dracula, Rita Talbot delivers Victor Frankenstein to the Count. Dracula is seated on one end of a long table, while Victor and Rita remain at the opposite end, near the door. Dracula does not invite them to sit.
I give you Victor Frankenstein, my lord.
Yes, the creature of legend. Though I confess he's not quite as mammoth in stature as I anticipated. No matter. I expect he'll suit my needs.
Dracula gestures for Rita to leave the room, and she does, after a shallow bow.
What is it you require of me?
I have enemies who would seek to undermine my work. I would employ your strength in eliminating them.
And what does your work entail?
If I can reunite you with your bride, do my own aims really matter to you?
Victor stands silent.
Very well. You've glimpsed beyond the mortal veil. That much of your legend is true, is it not? Then you know that there is no salvation waiting on the other side. Not for you or I, maybe not for anyone. A force is rising in hell and seeks a foothold in the mortal realm. A realm that I alone am destined to rule. When that force comes, I have no intention of burning with the rest of the world. When my arsenal is fully assembled, I shall wield absolute power over life and death on this plane, untouchable even by the gods themselves. Should I find your service valuable, I shall retrieve your bride's soul from hell and return her to you.
As Dracula concludes his pitch, one of Dracula's servants interrupts to serve dinner, leading a hollow-eyed, lifeless, naked man to the table and indicating for him to lie down, with his head closest to Dracula's place setting. Dracula drapes a napkin over his lap.
Can I expect your cooperation?
Dracula charms the man so that his wrist raises to the vampire's mouth. Dracula takes hold of it and bites, blood dribbling down his chin. Victor's jaw and fists clench.
Yes, Count Dracula.
Outside of the dining room, Rita has been eavesdropping. She seems satisfied that her mission has been a success. She takes a walk through the castle and is approached by another of Dracula's lieutenants, former Alabama Sheriff Dudley Hall, played by Walton Goggins. He's got news for her, which he dispenses with a side of his customary mean, good old boy teasing. Her son is in town. He landed in Cluj-Napoca this morning. Back at our protagonist's secret base, we get to see how the team spends their time. Jekyll toils away in his laboratory, where he's been working on a chemistry experiment. Larry comes to visit him. They've met once before, sort of, but Larry was in his vicious wolf form at the time. Jekyll had been sent to kill Larry, but Gwen convinced him to leave them both be. Larry's come to talk to him about it.
Why not kill us? Rid the world of another dangerous monster.
One needn't be a werewolf to understand what it's like to have a monster inside. Your monster happens to have a will of its own, as does mine.
Gwen told me about that. You become some kind of demon, right?
Not exactly. My alter ego, Edward Hyde, may be an uninvited guest from the world of the dead, but he's also me at my most cruel. He's capable of good, but mostly uninterested in it. I can only hope that his time here will have tempered him somewhat. I've been unsuccessful in reproducing gratium, the rare chemical that allows me to retain control of our body, and so I have to ration what I have left. As a matter of fact, it's the longest I've spent as myself in months.
Puts things in perspective, I guess. Once you're out of serum, I suppose the team will have to kill Hyde?
That's the contingency plan. Like most beings of dark magic, Hyde can be killed by a weapon made with quicksilver, and Mr. Morton is prepared to dispense with him should the need arise. Ideally, however, I'd prefer to do the deed myself, if necessary.
You'd do that? I mean, you're sure you could go through with it?
I've dedicated half my life to fighting evil. I've come to know it better than most. Evil is selfishness on a limitless scale, a willingness to sacrifice others for one's own gratification. To defeat evil, one must be willing to sacrifice oneself before others. I'll not force my companions to end my life for me. But more than that, when I die, I want to die a man, not a monster. Larry gets a demonstration of exactly how bad it's gotten for Jekyll, as he assists the weakening scientist into a prepared cell and locks him away just before he undergoes a gruesome transformation into the muscular and malignant Mr. Hyde. Hyde kicks the furniture in his cell around for a bit and screams the most revolting threats to his jailer. Larry is shaken. Hyde goes still and looks him dead in the eye. And just think, 3 nights out of the month, I'm still more human than you are. Gwen may have enhanced strength, speed, and healing, but that'll only take you so far unless you know how to fight, so Nick is giving her some boxing lessons. While they spar, Gwen asks Nick about the power structure of the team. Everyone seems to defer to Nick, even though he doesn't think he's much of a leader. Nick thinks that's because he put the team together. Gwen thinks it's because he's a handsome white man and we've been brainwashed to think that matters. But Nick says that the position is still open, and that he has a candidate in mind, Abraham Van Helsing, the latest generation in a long line of monster hunters going back century.
So, a white guy and a Nepo baby? I can see how you feel outranked.
He's alive, meaning not undead. I'm carrying the soul of an ancient Egyptian god who murdered his brother and wants to conquer the world. I've got a handle on it most of the time, but it also makes me vulnerable to Dracula's dark magic. Most of the team is cursed in one way or another. That means we can't ever really trust ourselves. We can trust Van Helsing.
Nick gets distracted when he sees Jenny and Carol working together at the computer bay. They've gotten close of late. Carol obviously has a crush, but it looks like Jenny might reciprocate. Nick is happy for her, but it's bittersweet. Nick and Jenny used to be an item, but he put a stop to it after his body became host to the Egyptian god Set, the wicked brother of Osiris. The mood picks up a bit as Jack, who has since gotten dressed in khakis and a polo shirt, takes a seat in an old upright piano that was obviously pilfered from some local restaurant. He starts serenading the crew with a rendition of The Best Is Yet to Come. Carol takes Jenny's hand and they start dancing, the latter a little embarrassed but charmed. Larry rejoins the group in the common area and lets Vale know that Hyde is asking for him. Gwen pulls Larry onto the dance floor, which cheers him up a bit. They're all over each other, which makes sense as they are not only in their 20s, but also werewolves. This emboldens Carol a bit, though, as it suddenly doesn't seem like much of a stretch to dance cheek to cheek. She goes for it, and Jenny, blushing, leans in. From the corner, Nick smiles weakly and sips a beer. In the laboratory cell area, Vale keeps Hyde company. They bounce a rubber ball back and forth between the bars of Hyde's cell and exchange filthy jokes and playful threats.
So you're like a roided up Jekyll, right? Does that mean your balls are smaller?
Come on in here and say that, you bloody wanker. I'll serve you your balls with raw fucking toast. Things wind down for the night, and Nick and Halsey have a brief conversation acknowledging the business with Carol. She says nothing's really happened between them yet, but in such close quarters, it's bound to happen eventually. He says he'll be all right, that he's happy for her. After everything that's happened, he's glad that they're still at least part of each other's lives. She goes to her bunk, leaving him alone to stew in the common room. The beds here are not intended to accommodate two people, but Gwen and Larry are used to being cramped and don't mind getting cozy. At least Gwen doesn't. Larry's having trouble sleeping. He checks his phone, which is connected to the base's secure network. It's been dangerous to check his email or socials for the past year, being a fugitive wanted by the law and his billionaire parents. This is the first opportunity he's had to check in on things without potentially giving away his and Gwen's locations. He has hundreds of unread mentions, texts, and emails, which he glances at. He sees his fraternity brothers' social posts. They've all moved on and are enjoying life in freedom and luxury. That was him not long ago. He's just about to put the phone away and give sleep another try when he gets a new text. It's from his mother.
I know you're in Transylvania. I've come to see you. Please let me help.
Larry suddenly locks his phone as if he's afraid it can see him. He settles him back into bed, throws an arm over a soundly sleeping Gwen, and thinks. Sometime later, the team receives a video message, which they watch together at the computer bay. It's from Abraham Van Helsing, the man we saw confronting Dracula at the start of our story.
Nick, if you're watching this, it's because I've been either captured or killed. With any luck, I've taken the countdown with me, but if Dracula's still alive when you get this, then you'll need to act quickly. My sources have located an artifact that could be the key to destroying Dracula forever. I've enclosed the location and what few details I've been able to verify. It is imperative that you succeed where I failed. Find the relic and kill Dracula while you still can.
The team starts planning a mission to a hidden tomb in Egypt, where hopefully whatever Van Helsing was looking for is still waiting for them. Nick also hopes that Van Helsing himself is still alive, and this rescue will result in his joining and leading the team. After some study, prep, and training, they elect to leave the next morning.
Wait, so what's our team name?
Team name?
Yeah, like the Terror Squad.
Ooh, or what about just the Fearsome?
The Nightcrawlers.
The Monster Mash.
Ooh, I like her. This girl's got good ideas.
Look, we don't need a clever team name. This isn't roller derby.
Oh my God. When I did roller derby, we had the best name. We were called the Polterdykes. And we had finished the season 4th in our league, but everyone agreed that we would have been first if Jackie Stewart didn't tear her ACL doing wind sprints before finals.
We're not naming the team. Let's all get some shut-eye. We leave at sunrise.
Larry, however, is getting cold feet. The night before the op, Larry and Gwen have a fight, during which he reveals that he's been in touch with his mother, who claims that her connections are still working on a cure for lycanthropy. Gwen and Larry are unaware that Rita is a vampire herself, but they do know that she's been in business with them, which is enough for Gwen to be sure she's not to be trusted.
Listen, I know you miss your family. I miss mine too, but look around you. We've got a team. We've got resources. We've never had it so good.
You've never had it so good. Look, I'm happy for you that you found your purpose in this community, but I don't want this life. I don't want to be this thing we've become.
What we are is special. It makes us powerful.
I don't feel powerful. I'm tired and I'm scared. However much stronger or faster I am most of the time, it isn't worth the cost.
As opposed to the power you used to have, which was paid for with the back-breaking labor of underpaid mine workers.
This cuts Larry deeply. He thought they were past this.
Fuck off, Gwen.
Gwen immediately regrets her pointed words, but they can't be unsaid. Larry finds an empty bunk to sleep in tonight. The next morning, Larry is gone. Gwen is upset over her busted-up relationship, but is also practical enough to know that Larry's departure also represents a serious security risk to their outfit. She offers to go find him. She thinks she can pick up his scent, literally. This is an ability that werewolves acquire after they spent a lot of time together. Halsey doesn't want her to go into enemy territory alone and offers to accompany her. Carol wants to come too, but Jekyll wants her to stay at HQ and help him run intelligence for the main mission, which will have to run concurrently. It's settled. Nick, Jack, and Vale will head to Egypt to find Van Helsing's weapon. Gwen and Halsey will follow Larry into the city, and Jekyll and Carol will stay behind to run the two missions remotely. Before Halsey departs, she and Carol take a moment.
I wish I could talk you into taking me along.
Carol, we don't know what we're running into. I don't want you getting hurt out there, or worse.
I'm tougher than I look.
Halsey says nothing to this, but cups Carol's face in her palm.
I don't know if I've ever said it to you, but these past few months have been...
You haven't had to say it. I felt it too. But I don't want you worrying about me.
I know you can handle yourself. You're a badass.
Halsey blushes.
I never used to see myself that way. I like the way you look at me.
Carol reaches into her pocket and retrieves the cross of Carmilla, now attached to a delicate gold chain. She tenderly clasps the necklace around Halsey's neck.
Come on back, and we'll both take a good long look.
Carol and Jekyll stand by in the garage as the two teams load into the van and depart via their sewer-disguised exit, speeding towards the deadly and dangerous Transylvanian cityscape. End of Act 1.
Yeah, Act 1. Act 1 of our crossover film.
I get to take a little break from reading now.
Yeah, that's a lot of reading because it's a lot of character setup and stuff. But I really love the way you structured this. I can definitely tell, first of all, that you are a professional film critic, but also that you watch a fuckload of movies.
A lot of movies.
Because
everything's synthesis.
This is so pitch perfect paced because we start with, after like sort of this big cold open, we get kind of a breather with Gwen and Larry. And we, honestly, I think they're kind of our, if Nick's our kind of main character, I think Gwen and Larry are our audience surrogates, right?
Yeah, because they're young and they're the only ones in the main team. In our previous, for those of you who haven't heard the previous episodes, a lot of our earlier installments kind of ended up sort of putting characters together. Like the team that you meet here are all characters that we've seen in previous films, and they got together by the end credits scene or whatever of those movies. But we did not attach Gwen and Larry to them yet. I thought that was a good way for us to get an intro. I also wanted to introduce every one of these characters through action first.
Right.
Before they, so by the time anyone's introducing themselves by name and explaining what they do, we already kind of have an impression of them and like what their utility is and what their weaknesses are.
Well, and that's what the opening chase is so good, because that's not actually anything we talked about in our, the Cross of Carmilla was a surprise to me when I read your Act 1, because that was nothing we had talked about. But it ends up being very key in the story because it's very helpful because we have a couple different human characters, and now we have an item that can protect them from the monsters that we have, but there's only one of it.
Yeah, that came about because I was trying to... it's cool. One of the reasons why I really like to write out the scenes themselves, rather than go through the broad strokes of we have, here's a chase where we're going to have to establish all these things, is that it helps me to work out certain particulars that are useful later. Like, I knew mechanically what I needed to get out of the introductory scene, and that became difficult because I'm like, all right, I need a situation that's going to be dangerous enough that somebody can get shot because I want Vale to get killed so that Nick can revive him, demonstrating their dynamic and their skill sets and powers and or lack thereof, right? And I needed to do something that would involve the Invisible Man. But I needed a scenario where an Invisible Man would be useful, but they would still also need visible people. And then the idea being like, okay, well, I also want to establish Halsey, and she's an archaeologist. So maybe it's like a museum heist.
Yep.
And the rest of it came together, and then it was kind of just the mechanics kind of, the scene was built around the needs for each character.
Yeah.
And there were really a limited number of avenues I could go. Because I kept running into problems being like, at some point there was going to be like a drop point where they needed to pick up a hard copy of a message from Van Helsing. But I'm like, yeah, but then Jack could just get it. Like, it needed to be something, what could everyone have something to do?
No, this ends up working perfectly, and it's very concise. It introduces everyone with a big action set piece. It's paced really well because it starts out with just kind of the goofy gag of the Invisible Man lifting the necklace and then swallowing it. But then climaxes with the reveal of Nick Morton, right? Who's our main character. And he gets this dramatic reveal.
He had to be the last one you see. Because it has
absolutely.
to be the only way to convey to... Obviously, anybody who's seen the movie is going to know Tom Cruise is a movie star. But whenever you want to give somebody a movie star entrance or want somebody to be looked at like a movie star, I always think of in The Prestige, one of my all-time favorite films.
Yep.
When Nikola Tesla enters the narrative, it is an unadvertised David Bowie. And you get this sort of, or at least at the time when I went to go see it, I was like 16 or whatever. I did not know Bowie was going to be in the movie. And I got the rock star shock that the character got from seeing Nikola Tesla from seeing David Bowie, right?
Yeah.
But you can't always count on that.
Yeah.
Like it needs to, you need to make an entrance.
Which we did in The Invisible Man, too, by completely hiding
Yes.
Tom Cruise's
It was
involvement,
very cool.
which you can go back to that episode.
Yes.
But yeah, I think this is all paced so well. And then, I mean, then we get sort of our quiet character establishing stuff at the headquarters, which is good because this movie is action set piece after action set piece. We really went blockbuster here, and we get two moments. One here where we sort of establish everybody and see them happy and sort of vibing, and then we'll get another kind of quiet moment later at the end of Act 2. And I think this is so good for establishing a lot of the dynamics. And what I was going to say about Gwen and Larry is not only are they our sort of audience surrogates because they're meeting everyone for the first time, but I think they're also kind of the heart of our film with their sort of relationship and family and like all their kind of issues. Everyone gets their own arc. Some of them are more prominent than others. Obviously, Nick's is going to be very prominent, but I feel like the one that audiences will relate to the most is the plight of Gwen and Larry. And we see that a little bit already with these two that are in love. They're ravenous for each other. They are feral for each other. But they're having some disagreements. Larry's mom is back on the scene, you know.
Right. I feel like their version, like all these characters have problems that we don't have, right? But they have to have relatable problems. And that's one of the reasons why it was really important to me. It's always important to me in like movies about especially like genre movies. I really think it's important to show people in relatable scenarios to provide contrast to the unreal stuff. That's why like Star Trek Strange New Worlds is the best new Star Trek show out of the live action ones because we see them eat dinner. Like it really just comes down to, here's them just hanging out.
Well, and that's
you
how
need
you get,
that.
That's how you get your horror stakes, right?
Yeah.
I don't think horror is scary unless you care about the characters, you know? And so I think that makes this work. So for Act 2, how we did this was we've split up the team now, and Dylan and I each took a path.
We split the party.
we split the party and we split the writing duties. So I end up writing what happens with Gwen and Halsey as they go after Larry. You wrote Nick and Jack and Vale going to Egypt, as well as Carol and Jekyll in the headquarters.
What was fun about this, and this was your suggestion when we broke this up, is that each of us ended up getting to write for characters that we didn't really play with in our individual movies.
Yeah.
Neither of us had used Vale, but the Mummy we've determined is kind of your territory. You reintroduced Nick Morton in The Invisible Man, and of course Jack in The Invisible Man. And then, so I got to play with all those characters on my terms, which was fun. I got to write, you'll see another character I got to write for. And then you got to play with the werewolves who you never got to write before.
And I was really excited to write Gwen and Larry and kind of get a chance to explore them. As well as I hadn't really written Halsey because she was featured in your Jekyll and Hyde, but was not in my Invisible Man. And so, it was very fun to write these characters that the other person had introduced and really fleshed out.
Of all the things that we kind of came up with in terms of process here, this actually ended up being something I was really grateful for. It was I think like I'm really happy that you came up with that idea that got us both kind of not out of our comfort zones because we're still figuring out our things, but it made it kind of a treat to write the second act
and make us more comfortable with all of the characters instead of just the ones we're working with.
Right. All right. So you'll know it's also convenient in terms of for just listenability that you'll know when we're hopping between sort of locations because they're going to cross cut by when Dalton is narrating or when I'm narrating.
Yes. So how this is going to work, by the way, is this episode is only going to be the first half of the movie. So we're going to get through the first half of our Act 2. And then we're going to break. And then the next episode will pick up the rest of Act 2 and Act 3. And we're going to leave you on a big cliffhanger. So we're going to go to a break and then come back for Act 2. But before we do, I want to quickly recap sort of the important stuff from Act 1, just in case you spaced out there for any time and you're not sure what's going on where.
We know we threw a lot at you.
We threw a lot at you. Basically, we now have our team together consisting of two wolfmen and a wolfman and wolfwoman, Gwen and Larry. We have the Invisible Man. We have the Mummy. We have two humans, Carol Laemmle and Jennifer Halsey.
And they got a thing going on.
We have Chris Vale, who is...
He's also human, but he's been dead a number of times.
Tom Cruise keeps reviving him. They've stolen an object called the Cross of Carmilla, which gives protection against dark forces. And they're basically trying to stop Dracula. Van Helsing has sent them a message saying they need to go to Egypt to acquire an artifact that can defeat Dracula, and that's where half of our team is going. The other half is going to retrieve Larry, one of our wolf people, because his vampire mother has reached out to him.
But he doesn't know she's a vampire. So he's going to meet his vampire mommy, and his girlfriend and Jenny Halsey are going after him. And Victor Frankenstein, who has been kind of our morally ambiguous character, has been picked up by Dracula and is working for him on the promise that Dracula will bring back his long-dead bride. Oh, and for clarification, our universe's Frankenstein's monster is also named Victor Frankenstein.
Yes, it's not us screwing up and calling the monster by the wrong name. If you go back and listen to our Frankenstein episode, I have squared that circle, and Victor Frankenstein is the monster. So we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, the rest of the story.
Amber, we're popular enough to plug the show. What's our show?
Hi, my name is Amber Autumn, she, her, and this is my co-host, Prince Devin, he, him, and we make a show called Original Podcast Do Not Steal, which is a weekly podcast in which every week we take your favorite intellectual properties, franchise, show, hope, dream, idea, and we make an original character in that property.
Joke insert here, pretend we're funny.
30 seconds is so short. Okay, thanks, bye.
Bye.
Welcome back as we enter Act 2. Larry shows up to the meeting spot his mother texted him, a downtown spice market, and replies, "I'm here early. Can you come pick me up?" She sends back, "I told you sundown. I'm in meetings all day. Just please wait for me there." Larry rolls his eyes and bounces his leg nervously. This is so typical. Meanwhile, Gwen and Halsey are on the hunt, but Gwen is having trouble finding Larry's scent now that they're in the city. They comb the streets, and Halsey asks Gwen how long they've been dating. She says about a year, and then asks when Halsey and Nick broke up. Halsey is a bit taken aback that Gwen picked up on that, and explains that it really barely even started before Nick was cursed.
His powers, they're a remarkable gift, but they make human relationships a lot more complicated.
Hey, fucking men, sister.
Oh? Trouble in paradise?
I'm sorry. Did the stuffy archaeologist just make a pun?
Oh God, I'm sorry. Carol must be rubbing off on me.
Wow. You two are moving fast.
Halsey rolls her eyes and asks about Gwen and Larry again. Gwen explains how empowered she's felt since becoming a werewolf, that it finally feels like she'll be able to make a difference in the world, even if the monthly moon menses are a huge pain. But all Larry can do is complain. He wants to get back to his rich, cushy lifestyle and end up the CEO of some blandly evil corporation and pretend that this never happened.
And you're worried that once he puts his wolf side behind him, he might leave you behind as well.
Gwen is silent.
I wish I had some sage older sister advice, but unfortunately relationships have never been my strong suit either. And I think it's safe to say we're in uncharted waters here.
After a moment, Gwen asks,
"Do you think it's possible to love someone, but still not be right for each other?"
I think that's the hardest lesson life teaches us, Gwen. If there's any silver lining here, it may be that you're learning it early.
Quick silver lining, you mean?
Okay, that one makes us even.
Meanwhile, Nick, Jack, and Vale have bribed their way onto a non-stop cargo flight. The good news is it'll put them over the tomb in under 4 hours. The bad news is it won't be landing there. There's a reason this place doesn't appear on any map and hasn't been plundered already by treasure hunters. It's in the middle of the desert, miles from anything. Nick has paid one of the pilots to rent a Jeep after he lands and drive out to pick them up. But riding out with him would take the team time that they don't have if they want to be in and out before sundown. That means the three of them will have to skydive over the site. Jack is mostly visible for a change, dressed from head to toe in the same skydiving gear as Nick and Vale.
Well, look at you all dolled up.
What? I'm not about to jump out of a plane naked.
I don't know. Sounds like it might be, liberating. Birds fly naked.
I'm naked like 60% of the time. There's not a lot of novelty left in it for me.
I don't know. Sometimes I envy you a little. I bet there's some cool perks.
Like what?
Like, what about when you take a piss and it looks like the stream is coming out of nowhere?
That is pretty cool.
That'd be the highlight of my day every day.
All right, boys, cut the chatter.
Nick pushes a button that lowers the aircraft's cargo ramp. The wind picks up, but the guys can still hear each other thanks to their headsets. Vale's headset has a camera attached, sending a live feed back to Carol and Jekyll.
That's the highlight of his day. He loves telling me to cut the chatter. That's how he gets his rocks off. I don't do it, though. He hates it. Look at him. Look how mad he looks.
He got you good, Nick.
I'm going to jump out of the airplane now.
Nick steps off the ramp like he's stepping off a curb. Vale takes a running start and dives. Jack stands at the edge, takes a look down, crosses his fingers, and hops off the edge. The trio lands in the desert, ditches their chutes, and uses a GPS tracker to find a specific waypoint. Vale hands out telescoping shovels from his backpack, and they start digging. Back at HQ, Carol is monitoring both missions at the computer bay, with Jekyll beside her. Finally, at nearly sunset, Jack's shovel hits something. They clear the areas and find a stone porthole. Together, they crack it open and drop a glow stick inside. Not too far a fall for an invincible mummy. They fix a rope to a piton and rappel down. They explore the cavernous site with their flashlights. Something catches his attention.
Well, boys, it looks like I walked into a family reunion.
The three men stand before a massive stone statue of the Egyptian god Osiris.
The sun is starting to set in Cluj-Napoca, and Larry is still waiting in the spice market as the vendors start to close up shop. As they cover up their spices, we cut to an exhausted Gwen who perks up and sniffs the air.
Wait, I think I've got him.
A black car with fully tinted windows pulls up to the spice market and the back door opens. Deep inside, we see the faint outline of Rita pulled back away from the light.
Come on now, get in.
Larry climbs in and the car takes off.
Mom, what are you doing in Transylvania?
What am I?
She smacks him upside the head.
What are you doing here? You ran away from home with that no-account wolf girl, leaving me to think you might be dead or eaten alive in the desert somewhere?
Mom, I'm a werewolf too.
Until finally one of the surveillance companies I hired picks you up exiting a plane in Transylvania, of all places. You're coming home with me right now, and we'll solve this little problem of yours together as a family.
I can't just leave Gwen and everybody. I mean, Gwen's contacts. She's got family here or something. But I can't just disappear on her too. Unless, Mom, did they find a cure?
Rita's eyes soften, unable to lie to her son. Her voice drops as she leans in close.
Listen, it isn't safe for you in Transylvania. There's a very bad man here, and he knows about you, and he wants your power.
Wait, you know about Dracula?
Don't say his name. He can hear you when you say his name. Look, I'm taking you to the airport now. You will go back to the States, to Laemmle, Pennsylvania, and you'll wait for me there. I still have some business to finish up here, but I'll come back to you as soon as I can.
Larry protests, but Rita cuts him off when she sees something in the rearview mirror. Cut to Gwen and Halsey riding on a motorcycle in pursuit of the car. They radio into Carol and say that they're on Larry's trail. Carol, back in HQ with Jekyll, pulls up their trackers on a map and says that it looks like Larry's headed for the airport. But Rita has spotted them.
Driver, turn left here. Take us to Patarat.
Carol turns her attention towards the Egypt team, who has been wandering the tunnels of this temple of Osiris for a little while now. They've stuck together, wary of getting lost, so the search for whatever Van Helsing intended for them to find there is taking longer than they expected. The playful banter between the men is finally hushed when they happen upon a grand stone altar, obviously the centerpiece of the temple. But instead of an artifact, they find only the impression of one, slightly engraved into the stone by its 3,000-year rest there. Its silhouette is that of a heka, or crook, like the sort that's often depicted in the hands of pharaohs on statues and sarcophagi.
It's not here.
Swell. What do we do now?
From the shadows, a voice answers in a playful southern accent. I'm so glad you asked, Jack. The team finds the source of the voice with their flashlights. It's Dudley Hall, the vampire last seen chatting with Rita back at the castle, and Jack's nemesis from the Invisible Man.
Dudley? What the hell are you doing here?
Is Dudley the guy from the,
Yep, that's him.
Cool, got it.
We're not leaving without the artifact. Hand it over.
That'd be difficult, seeing as it's not here. Your buddy Abe Van Helsing already nabbed it and brought it back to the castle. Practically gift-wrapped it for Count Dracula.
You're lying. Van Helsing would never give it over.
3 more vampires emerge from the shadows, where they've been hiding in bat form. They have our trio surrounded. Why now, you're talking as if Dracula gave him a choice. I think you'll find he's a very persuasive man. We cut briefly to Dracula brandishing the Crook of Osiris from his throne in Castle Dracula. His eyes glow red. Back at the temple, Dudley's eyes have that same glow, and then his body pulses with weird mystical energy. A coil of light wraps around Nick, lifting him off the ground for a moment before dropping him. He falls to one knee. Vale approaches Nick and leans over him.
Nick, you alright, boss? That was some spooky Harry Potter-looking shit.
Without looking up, Nick suddenly grabs Vale by the throat and then slowly lifts him off his feet. When Nick turns to face Vale, his face is not what it was. His skin is chalky and peeling. His irises turn yellow, then split in two. As he stands, his body becomes wrapped in dusty stained bandages, evoking the appearance of both Amenet from the 2017 Mummy and the classic Boris Karloff variety. Nick speaks in a voice not entirely his own.
Quiet.
Nick throws Vale hard against a stone wall. Dudley and his men smile sharp, toothy grins. Dudley turns his eyes to Jack. Let's get what we came for, fellas. Jack realizes Dudley's talking about him and starts to back away as the vampires advance. He turns around and breaks into a sprint, shedding his clothes as he runs. The vampires give chase. Vale tries to follow after them, but gets backhanded by the mummy.
Nick, come on, man, it's me. It's your buddy, Vale.
Quiet.
The mummy's mouth stretches unnaturally as he screams, and a beetle crawls out of his mouth and up the side of his face. He slams a fist dramatically against the dirt before his feet, and the ground nearby rumbles. Then it shifts. One by one, bony hands begin to break through the cracks in the stone floor. Throughout the chamber, dozens of rotting and skeletal bodies claw their way out of the surface. Vale crawls backwards away from the rising undead, but his eyes remain fixed on the deadly stare of Nick Morton, the living mummy.
We're back to Romania, where Gwen and Halsey continue to tail Rita Talbot's car.
Wait, it looks like they're turning off. Where are they headed now?
Gwen and Halsey stay in pursuit, Gwen sniffing the air. Gwen says she's starting to lose the scent, then makes a face.
Ugh, it smells terrible. Where are we?
Carol does some searching and tells them they're entering Patarat, the city landfill. Not only is it a dump, however, but it's also the sole Roma encampment in Cluj-Napoca, the home to 1,500 Romani people who live there illegally in abject poverty. I want to take a pause here and clarify because we are in Romania, and it may be confusing for listeners. The Romani people are not the primary people in Romania. Those are Romanians. The Romani people, or Roma, are actually a big ethnic minority in Romania and mostly live in like really bad poverty. And so this is a real place where basically the entire Romani population of Cluj-Napoca lives illegally at the city dump because that is the only place they're able to live.
I'd assumed, but I think they're like, oh, Dalton did some research.
I did do some research. The Romani are not the Romanians.
I mean, that part I knew, but I mean, yeah. I figured if you're going to go to this set piece that seems so specific and it's also like a socially relevant detail, I'm like, there was some homework done here.
Yes.
Back to the action.
Looking out for my girl, Gwen. Rita and Larry drive into Patarat, and we see the condition of the encampment. People of all ages stand outside in dirty clothes, huddled around fires. Their homes are run-down converted train cars. People wash up and fill buckets at spigots full of brown water, and all of this happens at the very edge of a massive landfill that seems to stretch on for miles. They park, and Rita fumbles with a briefcase filled with vials and needles. Larry protests and demands to know what they're doing there.
I'm so sorry, Laemmle.
She jabs him with a needle, knocking him out immediately. She gets out and pulls his limp body out of the car, throwing it over her shoulder with ease. She tells the driver to radio Dracula and tell him that something's come up and she'll be back late. Gwen and Halsey dismount and find the car empty. They begin to roam through the encampment, asking the Roma if they've seen anything unusual, but they don't speak English and are frightened of these outsiders. Gwen takes notice of the horrendous conditions of these innocent families halfway around the globe and opines about the global scale of injustice, which she has never seen up close. The job is so much bigger than she ever imagined. It makes her wolf power seem suddenly insignificant in comparison. Then they hear a scream from a nearby train car and run towards it. They enter and find a family of 8 Roma crouched against the far end of the car that serves as their home. Gwen and Halsey try to calm them down and ask them what happened. Gwen asks Halsey if she speaks Romani, but she doesn't. Halsey asks Carol on the comlink whether she can look up anything, but she's occupied. Something is going down in the Egypt mission that she has neither the time nor the words to explain. While Halsey tries to get answers from Carol, Gwen notices a little girl pointing behind them. She turns around just as Rita emerges from the shadows and jabs Gwen with the same serum that turned Larry into a wolf in the climax of our Wolfman film.
No, please.
She's terrified, her eyes looking wide at the defenseless family as she begins to transform. Rita turns into a bat and flies through a hatch in the ceiling above where the family is cowered.
Halsey!
Gwen growls as she transforms. Halsey turns and sees what's happening and runs to the family to try to help them through the ceiling hatch. It's a race against time as Gwen transforms. Her bones snap and lengthen and reseal. Her skin splits open and hair grows up from underneath, shedding bits of her flesh onto the ground. Her jaw snaps and her teeth fall out as new ones grow in from underneath. It's gnarly as fuck. It's going to be really gross. Werewolf movie lives and dies by its transformation. This is going to be a really nasty one. So
good.
Yeah.
I honestly, I think I didn't lean on it hard enough in the Wolfman.
You know what? Something I kind of get at this here. Something I picture that would be a really great werewolf transformation is we see a lot of the jaw lengthening, right? It like lengthens into the snout. I want to see as that happen, the teeth like get gaps in them because they're still human teeth,
right?
And,
And then they have to get pushed out for new teeth come in. I love that detail. It's really cool. I want to see that.
My version of a werewolf transformation is like the werewolf basically bursting out of someone's body, not the body changing, but a werewolf like tearing its way out of an existing body. Anyway, in Egypt,
the ghouls chase Vale through the temple. Vale's come packing heat and blows a few away with his pistol. Each is fragile and easily dispensed with. When he runs out of ammo, he finds that punches and elbows are enough to break their brittle old bones. But no matter how many he reduces to dust, there will always seem to be more. As he runs, he calls out for Jack, but gets no answer. The mummy follows, silently menacing Vale throughout the chase. Vale finally reaches the rope that he and the team had used to descend to the temple and climbs it frantically. As in Romania, it's past nightfall now on the surface. A nearby parked helicopter is picking up sand as its rotors spin up to speed. Both Vale and Carol and Jekyll back at base via broadcast see that Dudley and his 3 henchmen are walking towards the chopper. 2 of the vampires are dragging something behind them. It's Jack, as evidenced by the impression of his heels dragging in the desert and the displaced sand from the rotors producing a fine, uneven coat around his body. Vale is about to run after him when a massive hand lands on his shoulder. Vale turns around and looks face to chest, and then after some adjustment, face to face, at the patchwork visage of Victor Frankenstein. Carol and Jekyll see it too.
Forgive me.
From the base, we watch as Victor's hand covers the camera. In the desert, Victor takes hold of the crown of Vale's head and, with his other hand pressing down on his shoulder, violently pulls upward. Vale's head breaks in half at the jaw. Victor drops it next to the body, and it rolls so that it faces his beheaded body. Back at the base, Carol sits in silent, tearful shock. At first, Jekyll is the same way, but there's also something else. He's trembling. His breath gets faster and louder. Carol turns slowly and sees that he's now backing away from her, doubled over in pain. Eddie Hyde, furious over the death of Vale, is beginning to struggle for Jekyll's body.
Henry?
Fucking hell, can I not have one fucking thing of my own? As Jekyll's body begins to contort unnaturally, growing muscular in her suit, Carol rises from her chair. She knows what's happening.
Oh no.
Run!
We cut from Jekyll's transformation back to Gwen's. Halsey helps the family through the roof just as Gwen finishes her metamorphosis and runs for her. Halsey jumps up and just barely manages to squeeze through as Gwen bites at her ankles. Halsey hits the ground and makes a break for it. An earth-shattering howl reverberates from the trailer, freezing every Romani in the encampment as Halsey sprints among them.
Run! You have to run! Go, now!
Gwen bursts through the wall of the train car. Chaos ensues. The Romani scatter as Gwen tears her way through the encampment, chasing after Halsey. Halsey takes cover behind another car, and there's a tense sequence of Gwen hunting her slowly around the car. Gwen finds her, but just before she lunges, a group of Romani women emerge, holding silver artifacts shaped like different sigils, and chanting something. Gwen recoils and runs off to wreak havoc elsewhere. Halsey has an epiphany and takes the cross out from under her shirt.
Quicksilver. Carol, I think this cross has Quicksilver in it. If I can touch it to Gwen's skin, I think she'll transform back.
From Carol's end, there's only a distant roar and the sound of a crash.
Carol? Fuck.
Halsey sneaks through the camp, following the sounds of violence. Gwen is engaged with the circle of women, bucking and lashing out, afraid to touch their sigils. Halsey approaches, but just as she starts to get close, Gwen lashes the sigil out of one of their hands and uses the opportunity to tear through the women, not outright killing them, but injuring them and throwing them around. Halsey backs off, but Gwen gets her scent again and gives chase. Meanwhile, Larry is resting on a dirty mattress at the top of a mountain of garbage in the landfill. Rita flutters down and tries to shake him awake.
Okay, Lair Bear, time to make haste.
Larry's still out cold. Rita looks down at the carnage in the encampment below and sees her driver sneaking his way back to the car, carrying the briefcase of serums. Gwen stops chasing Halsey, sniffs the air, and turns to face the driver.
Oh, bugger. One more moment, dear.
She turns into a bat and flies towards the carnage. Halsey watches Gwen turn off her scent and head towards the driver.
Carol, I don't know if you can hear me, but there must be vampires here. Werewolves and vampires are mortal enemies, and wolves will always lock in on them before all other prey.
Suddenly, crackling through her earpiece, Carol, out of breath and still with crashing sounds in the background.
I knew that was real. The forums all laughed at me and said it was just Twilight bullshit.
Halsey smiles, relieved to hear Carol's alive, and chases after Gwen. At the base, we see that Carol has taken shelter underneath one of the tables in Jekyll's lab. We can hear that Hyde is tearing apart the next room. He's raving and growling about Vale, but this isn't a man experiencing grief over a friend. This is a child throwing a tantrum over another kid breaking his favorite toy.
Might as well come out, little birdie. Old Eddie's looking to eat his feelings and he's all out of Rocky Road.
Carol slowly rises and grabs a vial of serum and a gun-shaped vaporizer from the lab table, then leaps back to her hiding place just as Hyde slams the door open. She clamps her hand over her mouth and prays. In Patarat, Wolf Gwen gets to the vampire driver before Rita or Halsey can catch up and tackles him to the ground. He hisses and tries to transform, but Gwen has him pinned. She clamps her jaws around his head and tears it off, chewing on it and sending chunks of brain and viscera flying. Rita transforms into a bat and swoops around Gwen's head, distracting her and making her paw at the air. Halsey catches sight of the open briefcase on the ground with the vials inside. She runs and grabs it, prompting Rita to revert back to human and try to grab it from her. They wrestle with it until Halsey pulls out the cross, which repels Rita. Rita steals a glance up at Larry, and Halsey follows it, spotting him just as Gwen returns and chases Bat Rita away.
Carol, I don't know if you're there, but there's no way I'm getting close to Gwen like this. I'm switching to plan B.
She grabs the briefcase and runs into the landfill, climbing the trash in an attempt to get to Larry. It's like running through water, except the water is sharp and cuts at her with every step. Glass, needles, splinters, it all tears at her as she climbs awkwardly. When she's about halfway up, Rita flies off away from the fray, leaving Gwen to turn her attention back to Halsey. The werewolf jumps into the landfill and also swims its way up the mountain, gnashing its teeth at Halsey.
Carol, I need some help.
Back at the base, Carol is still cowering under the desk when an enormous hairy hand suddenly appears and throws it off of her.
Tag! You're it!
Carol gets to her feet and sprints through the HQ. The place is a mess, the computer's smashed, lab equipment overturned. The lights are flickering and sparks fly from broken electric panels. Hyde storms after her, laughing, and when he reaches her, he shoulder checks her from behind, sending her sprawling across the floor. She loses her grip on the serum vaporizer and it skitters across the floor. She crawls after it as Hyde approaches slowly from behind. She reaches out her fingertips to the vaporizer just as Hyde's hand clamps around her ankle. At the landfill, Halsey finally makes it to the peak and opens the briefcase. Wolf Gwen is not far behind.
Okay, there's 3 different vials of liquid in here. A green one, a red, and a silver. I need to know which one will turn Larry. Carol? Carol, I don't want to kill him.
Nothing. Halsey continues yelling for Carol as Gwen gets closer. Finally, her voice comes through.
The silver one! It's the silver glowing one.
Halsey jabs the silver fluid into Larry, transforming him once again into a werewolf. He howls at the moon as Gwen arrives and they begin to fight. Halsey stumbles her way through the fray, falling down the trash mountain as the 2 wolves wrestle in the landfill. Back down at the encampment, Rita transforms into a human and sees the fight from a distance.
Damn it.
She runs back to the car and drives away from the encampment. At the base, Carol stands over an unconscious Jekyll, holding the spent vaporizer in her hand. She's drenched in sweat, but otherwise unharmed. The wolves fight their way back down to the encampment, tearing at each other and drawing blood. Halsey uses the opportunity to jump on Larry's back and press the cross to his skin. He recoils and begins transforming back into himself. Halsey jumps off and rolls underneath Gwen's belly and does the same. Once they've reverted, Larry is once again passed out, while Gwen sits and surveys the carnage all around her. The Romani encampment is in ruins. Their homes are destroyed. They huddle in groups, tending to their wounded. They look at Gwen with fear and hatred.
I did this?
Come on, Gwen, grab Larry. We have to go.
No, we have to stay. We have to help them.
We've done enough here, Gwen.
Tears well up in Gwen's eyes, reflecting the orange flames that engulf the camp.
In Egypt, the helicopter carrying the vamps and the kidnapped Jack takes off. Moments later, Nick struggles up the rope to the surface, once again himself. He sees the helicopter in the distance, then notices the Jeep parked nearby. The blood-drained body of the bribed co-pilot is dangling from the driver's side. It's seconds before he notices what's right in front of his feet, partially buried in the sand. It's Vale's body. Nick drops to his knees and wipes off sand from the body, working up from his chest until he gets to what he assumes at first is his half-buried head. But it's not half-buried. It's half missing. Nick scrambles, digging at the surrounding sand until he finds something precious, Vale's head, starting at the upper jaw. Nick holds it and takes a deep breath, attempting once again to use his revival powers on Vale. After a moment, Vale's eyes blink. He can't speak. He can't scream. But the expression on what's left of his face says more than enough. Nothing should live like this. Tearfully, Nick holds Vale's forehead to his own, whimpers.
I'm so sorry.
And releases his friend from the mortal world.
And that's where we'll leave things for today.
Woo!
Our heroes are in a dire position. To recap everyone's current position, Larry and Gwen were turned into werewolves and decimated a Romani encampment, which I really wanted to not kill anybody there because I don't want to use the Roma people as just like cannon fodder.
Right.
But I also wanted to make the point that Gwen is someone who cares about helping and helping the poor, helping, the powerless.
Yeah, social and economic justice is very important. I really like that when we switched characters, I really like that you created something for Gwen that was going to cut her really deep and make her doubt herself.
Well, and because her whole thing has been like, oh, these wolf powers are good because they give me power in the fight against injustice. And now she's seeing the other side of that, which is that they can also be used against that. And now she's finding that she has caused harm to these people, although not outright killed anybody. So Gwen's not doing too great. Jekyll turned into Hyde and destroyed the base.
Just wrecked the base. Although I don't remember actually if I ever addressed that it's wrecked later in the script, or if you do.
We
don't really spend much time there.
We don't spend much time there. Yeah.
But Carol lives.
Carol lives.
Despite all the death flags that we threw at her earlier in the movie, Carol survives the Hyde encounter. And but you know who doesn't survive? Chris Vale.
Jake Johnson is dead for good. After dying 4 times and being revived, Nick, for the first time, this is Nick discovering that his revival powers have limits, which is he can bring them back to life, but he can't put the bodies back together.
Right. And so he has to kind of face that limitation and say goodbye to his friend. And we've now left all of these characters, except for kind of Carol.
And let's not forget that Jack has been kidnapped.
Oh, Jack has been kidnapped by vampires. That's very important.
We'll talk about this next episode, but one thing we established in The Invisible Man is that when vampires drink Jack's blood, they turn invisible and are immune to daylight. So the vampires, one of our post-credit scenes in The Invisible Man was Dracula ordering Dudley to kidnap Jack, and now that they have succeeded.
That's happened. Now, of course, in the context of just the story, we do also reestablish that in the next episode. But anyway, gosh, this is a lot of movie.
It's a lot of movie. We're only halfway through the movie. We've still got a long ways to go. Oh, and the other failure, the artifact was gone.
The artifact. They didn't even get the thing they went for.
Which, just to remind people in case you missed it, the artifact they were looking for, the crook that was missing, is the crook that Van Helsing had at the beginning of the movie, meaning he must have filmed that before he went to Castle Dracula and before he got the crook. And so now that crook is in Dracula's possession.
And he used it to channel his power through Walton Goggins. And turn Nick temporarily into a more traditional Universal Monsters mummy.
We finally got we wanted to turn him into like the mummy.
Yeah, this was our full-on monster movie part of the movie.
Yes, we talked about this last time, how we wanted to try to treat it like an anthology movie with like different types of, we have a mummy movie on one side, a werewolf movie on another side, and then like our Jekyll and Hyde sequence.
And then we opened with a Dracula movie. So we've reached the midpoint of our movie. Everything sucks for them now.
Oh, I wanted to also point out, I also wanted to do the Romani encampment thing because it's a good callback to the original
Wolfman. That's
which
right.
Features Romani characters, notably played by Bela Lugosi, and figure kind of racistly into that movie.
Yes, they don't use the words we're using.
Yeah, they don't say Romani.
We are. Yeah, I'm really happy with how those mesh together. It's like the way that works. I mean, I don't know how much longer we want to talk about it in this episode.
Yeah, we can kind of wrap things up. But yeah, I think we ended up both writing half of those and they meshed together so well. And we kind of both ended up going in and working the Carol Jekyll stuff because that's sort of like
that was the bridge between the two of them. So we kind of
stories,
it had to fit into the rhythm of both of our stories, not get in the way of either. And I think we did a pretty good job of that.
I think so too. So join us next time on Are You Afraid of the Dark Universe to find out how our heroes get out of this predicament and if they are going to stop Dracula. And before we go, plugs. Let's talk about where you can find us because this might be your first episode. Go ahead, Dylan. You go first.
You can follow two of us on Twitter for the podcast at Dark Universe Pod on Twitter.
Still exists.
If Twitter still exists when this airs, we're recording this in early November, so I mean, Twitter might not be a thing by the time it goes out. And my personal Twitter is at Dylan Roth, DYLANROTH. That's Dylan as in Bob, Roth like David Lee.
And I'm Dalton Deshane. You can find me on all social media at Dalton Deshane. I'm the only one out there. I make music. I make this podcast. I make horror comics. And I do a very silly band called the B69s where I cover pop songs in the style of the B52s, which has gotten very popular lately. You may know me from that first, possibly. And there might be more of those out by the time you hear this. But so follow us on social media. Check out our other work because we both do a lot of stuff outside of this podcast. And we will see you next time for the thrilling conclusion of our big crossover, The Dark Legion, House of Dracula. And until then, stay afraid of the dark universe.
We need it to come. We need a new one.
Phase 2, we need to figure out what our closing tag is.
You all can't hear, but I'm looking at Dalton to see what shape his mouth is in the first words. I don't know what he's going to say.
We're going to eventually, by the time we get to our Infinity War, we'll have a closing tag that we can agree on. Hope you like this, and we will see you next time for the finale.
Bye-bye.